I have some questions for you. So you mentioned that there are lots of different types of lighting, which we know. You step on a set, they have, fill light and key light, and then Eyelight. How do you tell the difference? How does an actor step into a scene and know which one is their Eyelight?
It's a really hard thing to point out, because you would assume that if there's like a super large source that the camera's going to see it. However, that's not always the case. There are different sizes of Eyelight, of course. So there's like the big setups, and then there's like the tiny little candles that you might have in the background. So it's like a really hard thing because there's two things that have to happen. One of them is it's the light coming to your eye, and then it's your eye reflecting that light into the lens. And those two things, angle-wise, have to be perfect in order to get an Eyelight. So for instance, there's a white wall behind us. If I lit that, it wouldn't really appear as an Eyelight, even though it is like a large white source, because it kind of has more of a blend effect. But for something like a hot source that's happening right here, I know that that is giving me an Eyelight, and when we set it up, that's something I checked. But as an actor, you might assume that's an Eyelight, but if it was higher up, or if the camera was higher up, or this was lower and camera was lower, it might not come out as an Eyelight. So it's something you're always having to have a conversation with your director and DP about. If you're wondering like, oh, is there an Eyelight I have to hit for my mark? Is there somewhere I have to look? What's the brightest part of the frame? Is that what I'm supposed to be looking at? A lot of the time DPs for that connection will set up Eyelight so that you do kind of stand out within the frame, or we are able to really pick up those emotions through that you're trying to communicate through and emote through your eyes. So it's a hard thing to understand only because it does vary set by set. A lot of the time, as you know, you're trying to open up to camera intentionally. This would only not be the case if your director's telling you to obviously close yourself off and not see camera at all. But DPs will build certain rigs around the lens or on top of the camera or put sources near to the lens in order to pick up that Eyelight. One of the things that they have are like smaller little lights. This one's by Aperture. Aladdin's another company. And these tiny lights, if you have a really bright set and you like dim them down kind of all the way, you'll be able to get like a point source within the eye, close to the lens, that won't light you necessarily, which is great. One thing I really love to use is reflectors. But once again, that I have to make sure that I tell the actors, I say like as an actor, you have to see the reflection of the light source in order to get that Eyelight. So it really is paying attention and having that communication relationship as always.
Yeah, so we kind of started talking about that. How am I supposed to use an Eyelight? And should I look directly at it during the scene? Is it just there and whatever I do, it's been set up to make sure it hits me in the right space if I'm on my mark? What's the best way that I can utilize an Eyelight?
Well, it's a question of like to be or not to be. Like, is it an Eyelight or not an Eyelight? Like, are you supposed to, as a character, have an Eyelight? Or are you supposed to not have an Eyelight? Are you like the villain? Is it supposed to be you have no Eyelight because we can't connect and like we want you to be shut off, we don't want the audience to connect to you? Mm-hmm. Or do we want total like control over like seeing what emotions you have or like what you're thinking next? So it starts with that conversation with your director of like, hey, is there an Eyelight that's really important for the scene that I should hit? Is there a certain direction I should look? And it probably won't come down to a conversation about Eyelight. It'll probably come down to a conversation of like, what direction should I look? Because they'll set that light for you and they probably won't want to tell you like, oh, there's an Eyelight there, because they think it's like giving you a lot of information that you shouldn't be focusing on. Mm-hmm. But if you did want to specifically ask, hey, is there like an Eyelight that I'm supposed to like look at or look in some sort of direction so I'm getting it, whereas like that primary source you want me to step into, they'll probably add a mark so that you land where that is the most effective place.
So it seems like during a scene it could be very easy to lose your Eyelight. Like, say you jump off your mark on accident, or you're doing something and it's not hitting you anymore. Is there ever any, mark on the wall or anything that to indicate where your eyelight is to find again? Should you be thinking about that?
I think if it distracts you from the emotional state that you need to be in, it's not something you should be thinking about. However, it's something you can discuss during camera rehearsal because they will have lit by then. And so you could say, is there some, like, where's my eye line? And they'll give you that mark, but you can also be like, is there an eyelight mark? Like, if it's something that really you think as a character, you've spoken with your director and you remember in prep you had that conversation of like, your character always needs eyelight or your character never has eyelight because you don't want to connect it all to the rest of the people within that ensemble or within that scene. We don't want to know what you're thinking. We want to keep you dark. You're depressed. We don't want eyelight. We don't want to feel with you. That's also like, how do I make sure I'm still lit, but I'm not getting that eyelight? So it is just communication. And yes, you can have marks for where you're not getting eyelight or where you are getting eyelight. It's just if you can balance it all together so that you're not feeling overwhelmed by the number of technical marks there are. Because at the end of the day, your job as an actor is to act and to emote, and we're there to support you and make it easy for you. So it's just, once again, that conversation.
Yeah. What are like the different emotions or feelings or moods that different eyelight sources can create, or different uses of eyelight?
So one of my camera operators who was with us in the camera movement class, Stas, he reminded me of an eyelight to help if an actor wants to even emphasize more that power over like emotion and tears and crying and sadness. Or like crying tears of joy, whatever, that we can add lights to the waterline to help with the placement of picking up any tears or any welling that's happening. So we can like really help where that emotion happens if we're all on the same page. There are also like maybe like Blade Runner, for instance, the original Blade Runner has a very famous eyelight where she has like this red eyelight or like this glowing eyelight, I think, that like takes over her entire eye. So it's like a mix of how big do we want that source, how obvious do we want it to evoke. Maybe it's like the creepiness. If you're using tube lighting, the shape of your light is going to be the thing that reflects. So if you're using like a tube light, it's going to be like a sliver of light, very like snaky kind of, or like robotic, I'd say. If you're using something a little more like soft, like a window light, and you need to shape it that way, or like circular, it's a little more natural. So you can really play up your character with those conversations of like, I'm going to give them like a tube red light because at the end we find out they're a robot. Like, I don't know, things like that. So it really, you can kind of go anywhere with eyelight, and that's the beauty of it, or the absence of it.
Is there any concern that could get too distracting, or that the shape of an eyelight is the wrong shape?
Yes.
For the story.
Yeah, you'll actually like see a lot of famous BTS setups for different films, but one of them that comes to mind is Knives Out, where they built an eyelight that looked like a window that had the exact window pane and blinds that were in the reverse, so that they had the same eyelight that was large enough in the close-ups that it looked like it was coming from that window, so the source was coming from that window. So it's a mix of like blending into the story versus like the Blade Runner example is an idea of how you could have such a powerful eyelight that it's in the story because we've established it for so long and built on it. So yes, it might be a strong choice, but hopefully we've built up to that aesthetic choice, that it makes sense. And this is why we created cinematography for actors.
Yeah, these little tiny tools that we don't learn them in acting classes. We have to go to film school to figure them out. These little tools create such meaningful moments in film and television, and knowing them can just enhance our performance that much more. Understanding them before we get to set, so we're not thrown off by, a DP saying, hey, we've got lights for you here, look right at them, and that can throw us off in a huge way. So we're protected from them. I just don't think we need to be protected anymore. We can learn it, we can figure it out, we can understand why we're using these tools.
Yeah. And then you can choose to like throw that out if you have an emotional scene that you're like, I can't be bothered with highlight right now. I really need to focus on this moment with my director. But at least maybe somewhere in your subconscious, you're like, but I did learn. If I can look at the end, I've nailed this. If I can like look in that direction for that highlight or that eye line and nail it, I'm good. So it's a lot of fun building a story together and forming those relationships on set. And that's just, an Eyelight is just one of those beautiful things that tie it all together.
A little tool that we hope helps you.
Thanks.
Thanks.